Tonight we are not looking up at the sky. We are looking down at a piece of paper, and our entire fortune depends on the words we are about to write. The room is a cocoon of shadow, lit only by a single, guttering candle that makes the parchment glow like old bone. The air smells of wax, of ink, of the faint, musty damp that seeps through every stone wall in this city. Your hand is cramped, not just from the writing, but from a deep, clawing anxiety that sits in your gut. You are a merchant in, say, Genoa, in the year 1315. And you are trying to do the impossible, predict the future. Not the grand future of empires or prophecies, but the immediate, crucial future of the wind, the rain, and the waves. You have no satellite imagery, no radar, no smiling TV presenter with a colorful map. All you have is rumor, a saint's calendar, the ache in your grandfather's knee, and the desperate, scribbled words of people like you, scattered across the known world. This is the reality we're stepping into, a world where commerce moved at the speed of a sailing ship and a galloping horse, and where a single, UN-forecasted storm could erase a lifetime's work. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Because the journey we're starting tonight isn't just about old letters. It's about understanding a mindset, a world where information was physical, fragile, and worth more than gold. You are about to become a medieval business person, and let's be brutally honest, you probably won't survive this. Not because of plague or warfare, though those are constant background noises, but because of a simple spring drizzle in Flanders that you didn't hear about until 6 weeks too late. Your modern brain, used to instant updates and global connectivity, is your greatest liability here. You need to shed it. You need to feel the profound isolation, the terrifying silence between one piece of news and the next. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You dip your quill into the iron gall ink, its acidic bite a familiar scent. The letter is to your factor, your trusted agent, in the bustling port of Bruges. You've just received his last missive, carried over the Alps by a courier whose boots are still caked with the mud of a dozen different principalities. The news was mostly good. Prices for Lombard cloth are holding, the shipment of alum from Constantinople arrived. But it's the postscript, the afterthought, that has your full attention. We have had mild rains for a fortnight, which delayed the unloading of the Santa Maria. The roads to the Frankfurt Fair are said to be passable, but only just. This isn't small talk. This is raw, critical data. You are now cross-referencing this information with a mental map built from a dozen other letters. The rains in Bruges mean the rivers might be high enough for faster barge transport further inland, but those same muddy roads could mean the overland carts from Frankfurt will be late, increasing the price of the German metals you were hoping to buy. Your mind becomes a low-tech weather model, churning through variables of mud, wind, and manpower. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor us. The vast commercial revolution of the Middle Ages, from roughly the 11th to the 14th centuries, was built on credit and trust stretched over vast distances. The bill of exchange, an early form of check or wire transfer, allowed money to move across Europe without moving heavy, dangerous chests of coin. But that system of credit depended entirely on things physically moving as promised. A storm in the Channel wasn't just bad luck, it was a default on a loan, a broken contract, a cascade of failures. Your entire profession was a high-wire act over an ocean of uncertainty. One of the most common weather instruments for a Mediterranean merchant was the behavior of dolphins. It was widely believed that if dolphins played calmly in the wake of a ship, fair weather was assured. But if they swam rapidly and erratically away from the ship's path, a storm was chasing them, and you. You're not just reading letters, you're mentally compiling a bestiary of omens. The flight patterns of birds, the redness of a sunset, the way smoke from a tavern chimney behaved, all of it was grist for the mill of guesswork. Historians still argue whether this obsessive noting of weather in correspondence was a deliberate, systematic form of early business intelligence, or merely the background noise of a life utterly at the mercy of the elements. Was it the medieval equivalent of a corporate spreadsheet cell labeled Q3 risk assessment, or was it just the helpless sigh of someone watching the clouds gather over their livelihood? The truth, as we'll see, is probably a messy, human mixture of both. You finish your sentence, your quill scratching a final, worried question about the spring thaw in the Alpine passes. You sand the paper, seal it with a dollop of red wax pressed with your signet ring, a mark of your identity and your bond. This piece of parchment, with its mundane chat about the weather, is about to become a vital node in a network stretching thousands of miles. It is both a lifeline and a confession of profound vulnerability. You hand it to your servant, who will take it to the next courier. And then you wait. For weeks. In the dark. With only your fears and the flickering candle for company. The candle has burned lower. The wax pools, a miniature landscape of its own, as you stare at the ledger open before you. This isn't just a book, it's the story of your life, written in numbers. And right now, the story is a thriller. On one page, the neat, inky columns list your assets. The value of the wool currently sitting in an English warehouse in Southampton, the price of the Venetian glassware being loaded onto a galley in the lagoon, the expected return from the sale of Iberian iron in Alexandria. The numbers are promising, even bold. They speak of expansion, of a new house in the hills, of a favorable marriage for your daughter. Turn the page, and the liabilities whisper a different tale. The staggering loan from the Bardi banking family, taken out to finance the wool purchase. The wages owed to the sailors on the galley, men who will mutiny if not paid promptly upon safe return. The customs duties, the broker fees, the cost of bribing the port official in Alexandria to look the other way on a crate or two. The 2 pages are in a tense, silent standoff. And the referee, the force that will decide which narrative wins, is not in this room. It is 1,000 miles away, in the form of a breeze, a cloud bank, a sudden, treacherous line of whitecaps on a wine-dark sea. You are calculating the price of a storm at sea. Let's make it concrete. That Venetian galley, the Roccaforte, represents not just your goods, but your collateral. You used its promised cargo as a guarantee for part of that Bardi bank loan. The mainstream historical fact here is the sheer, eye-watering value of a single medieval merchant voyage. We're not talking about a cottage industry. A fully laden Venetian galley sailing to the Levant could carry cargo worth the equivalent of millions of today's dollars. Its loss would be a local economic catastrophe, not just a personal tragedy. It would wipe you out, certainly, but it would also damage your investors, the ship's insurer, if you were lucky enough to have one, a nascent and wildly expensive practice, the sailors' families, and the merchants waiting for its goods. Your individual risk is woven into a vast, fragile tapestry of credit. So you do the math, the anxiety making the numbers swim. The galley itself is a floating fortune. Its cargo, bolts of Flemish cloth, Baltic amber, German silverwork. But it's coming back with the real treasure, spices. A single sack of peppercorns from the Malabar coast is worth more than a peasant family sees in a lifetime. Nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, these are not kitchen condiments to you. They are compact, lightweight, wildly valuable currency. A storm doesn't just sink wooden cloth, it sinks capital. It sinks futures. Beyond early insurance contracts, there were creative methods. Some merchants, particularly in the risky Baltic trade, would split their cargo across multiple smaller ships, a practice called partitioning. It was the medieval version of not putting all your eggs in one basket, except the baskets were leaky, wind-powered wooden bowls crewed by superstitious men. Others relied on saintly intervention, paying for votive masses for safe passage or having their cargo blessed by a priest. Imagine hedging your bet on a futures market by also lighting a candle to Saint Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors. You're covering both your spiritual and financial bases. This is where the letters become more than communication. They become actuarial data. When you write to your colleague in Venice, you're not just asking after his health. You're probing. How did the Fortuna fare on its return from Cyprus? We heard whispers of a late-season mistral in the Aegean. You're collecting loss statistics. Every piece of gossip about a ship gone missing or arrived damaged is a data point that adjusts your internal calculation of risk. It tells you which routes are becoming more perilous, which seasons less reliable. Historians still argue whether this collective, shared experience of loss led to a more systematic understanding of maritime risk, or if it simply reinforced a fatalistic, superstitious outlook. Did the man who lost 3 ships to winter storms in the North Sea become an advocate for stricter sailing seasons, or did he just decide Neptune had it in for him and invest in farmland instead? The pressure in your head builds, a low thunder. That storm you're picturing isn't an abstract concept. It's a specific monster, a gregale screaming down the Adriatic, or a Bay of Biscay gale that can bury a cog under mountains of grey water. Its price tag is the difference between the left and right page of your ledger. It's the dowry, the house, the legacy. You close the ledger, the thump of the cover final. The numbers are locked in. Now, everything depends on the wind, and on the hope that someone, somewhere, will see it coming and care enough to put pen to parchment to warn you. A hope that feels as thin as the paper you're about to write on. You break the seal on the latest letter, the wax crumbling like dried blood under your thumbnail. It's from Matteo, your man in Bruges. The first few lines are the usual pleasantries, prayers for your health, blessings on your household. Your eyes scan past them, hungry for the meat. And there it is, in the 3rd paragraph. The winter has been uncommonly mild here, with little frost. The sheep have fared well, and the wool clip from the Yorkshire abbeys is said to be of exceptional length and fineness this season. However, the same rains that spared the flocks have made the roads from the inland markets a quagmire. The carters are demanding double their usual fee, and even then, they cannot promise delivery to the port before the feast of St. Gregory. Your mind, a well-oiled if anxious machine, immediately starts translating. This isn't just news, it's a cascade of logistical implications. Fine, long wool means higher quality cloth can be produced in the Flemish weaving towns, which could increase your potential profit if you can get it to the dyers and weavers on time. But those impassable roads? They are a tightening noose. The carter's doubled fees will eat into your margin. The delay means missing the planned shipment on the Santa Clara, which was to catch the predictable spring winds down to Lisbon. If the wool sits in a Bruges warehouse until the roads dry, it will miss the Lisbon market entirely, and you'll have to wait for the slower, summer trader bound for Italy. Your cash flow, the lifeblood of your operation, just developed a serious clot. This is the moment you understand, viscerally, that you are not just a buyer and seller of goods. You are a manager of a supply chain. A terrifyingly primitive, stretched to breaking point supply chain that spans continents and is held together by hope, parchment, and the ligaments of muddy roads. Your business is a living organism, and its nervous system is this correspondence. A fever of bad weather in one limb, Flanders, causes a palsy in another, the overland cart network, which threatens to starve the heart of the operation, your liquidity in Genoa. You feel a phantom ache in that Yorkshire dale, a sympathetic chill from the Bruges rains. Let's get a mainstream historical fact on the table. The medieval commercial revolution was fundamentally about linking disparate markets. It created an interconnected economic world where English wool was spun in Flanders, dyed with alum from Anatolia, finished in Italy, and sold in Egypt. But this beautiful, profitable web had a critical weakness. Every single link was vulnerable to the climate. A drought in Anatolia meant no alum, which meant undyed cloth, which meant a cancelled order from Cairo. You are now the spider sitting in the center of that web, feeling every tremor, every change in atmospheric pressure, through the silken threads of your letters. The carts themselves. Those carters demanding double? Their vehicles were often little more than wooden boxes on solid oak wheels, lashed together with leather and faith. They had no suspension. They routinely broke down. In wet conditions, they'd sink axle-deep into the mire, a phenomenon so common it had its own term, foundering. A cargo of wool soaked in ditch water was ruined. So your letter isn't just reporting on rain, it's reporting on the failure rate of medieval automotive technology. You're not just a merchant. You're a crisis manager for a transportation network that would give a modern logistician a nervous breakdown. Historians still argue whether this fragile, weather-beaten system actually encouraged innovation or just reinforced conservative, risk-averse behavior. Did the constant threat of loss force merchants to develop better contracts, better shipping technology, better methods of communication? Or did it make them cling to known routes, known partners, and known saints' days, terrified of any variable they couldn't control? The evidence is mixed. You see both in your own actions. You're innovating by using a bill of exchange to pay the Flemish weaver, bypassing the physical movement of silver. But you're also about to consult an almanac based on the zodiac to see if the skies will clear after the feast of St. Gregory. The anxiety transforms into action. You must rewrite your plans. You dip your quill, the nib scratching furiously as you draft orders. A letter to your financier in Florence, asking for a short-term extension on your credit, citing transportation delays due to inclement conditions, the medieval version of supply chain issues. A swift note to the shipmaster of the Santa Clara, releasing him to sail for Lisbon without your cargo, a painful but necessary decision to avoid paying demurrage fees. And finally, the most important one, a new letter to Matteo. You authorize him to pay the extortionate carter's fees, but only half now, half upon delivery. You instruct him to seek out warehouse space near the port, but one with a good, slanted roof and raised flooring, for dampness is the enemy of the fleece. Every word is an attempt to impose order on the chaos of the European spring. You are fighting the weather with ink, building levees of instruction against a flood of mud. The quill moves, a tiny dam against a continent of uncertainty. The pile of correspondence on your desk isn't just paper, it's a fractured mirror reflecting the world. You've learned to read it with a scholar's eye, pausing not just for explicit news, but for the hidden language woven between the lines. Matteo's letter from Bruges is now joined by others. One from your cousin in London, its parchment thicker, damper. One from your agent in Constantinople, the paper thinner, finer, the script a graceful dance of Latin characters trying to look cosmopolitan. You lay them out like a general surveying maps before a campaign. This is your intelligence briefing. And the most vital intelligence, you've come to realize, is often buried in the casual aside, the postscript, the seemingly offhand observation. Take your cousin's London letter. He spends a paragraph complaining about the price of Gascon wine, another boasting of a new falcon he's purchased. Then, almost as a throwaway, the Thames has not frozen this winter, so the coal ships from Newcastle have come regularly, keeping the hearths warm and the smithies busy. Bingo! A winter mild enough to keep the Thames ice-free means the Newcastle colliers are operating on schedule. That means English iron production, dependent on coal for smelting, is humming along. You can infer that the price of English iron goods may be stable or even drop slightly due to consistent supply. That's a data point for your own dealings in metalware. This is the ledger's hidden code. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval merchants were masters of embedded information. They couldn't afford to waste precious parchment, expensive courier time, or their own limited literacy on pure frivolity. Every sentence served multiple purposes: maintaining the personal bonds that were the foundation of trust, conveying explicit instructions, and transmitting market intelligence. A letter was a multi-layered document. The surface layer was social glue, greetings, prayers, family news. The next layer was the direct commercial order: buy 100 bolts of cloth at a price not exceeding X. The deepest, most subtle layer was the intelligence report: the weather, the state of roads, political rumblings, crop conditions, gossip about competitors' shipments. Reading a merchant's archive is like reading a spy's coded dispatches, if the spy was also deeply concerned about his nephew's cough. The use of seemingly benign words as market signals. Scholars have found letters where merchants use the health of animals as a cipher for market conditions. A phrase like "the hawks are flying well this season" might indicate that luxury goods are in high demand among the nobility. A report that "the local sheep have a touch of the murrain" could be a warning that prices are about to spike due to scarcity. It was a way of sharing sensitive information that might be intercepted by a rival or a nosy port official. Your correspondence is full of this benign espionage. When you write to Constantinople and ask after your agent's gardens, you're not inquiring about his horticulture. You're asking about the local political climate. Is it fertile for business, or is it withering under some new imperial tax or rumor of war? Historians still argue whether this embedded information was a conscious, formalized practice or an organic, intuitive skill born of necessity. Did fathers explicitly teach their sons, "Son, when you read about rainfall in Champagne, you must immediately think of the river levels on the Seine and the cost of floating timber to Paris"? Or was it simply something a successful merchant's brain learned to do automatically, connecting 100 disparate dots into a picture of opportunity or threat? The debate mirrors our own time. Is business acumen a teachable science of data analysis, or an unteachable art of gut feeling and pattern recognition? You apply this code now to the letter from Constantinople. Your agent spends most of it detailing the successful sale of your Venetian glass. But at the end, he writes, "The winds from the Black Sea have been persistent and cold this spring. The fishermen complain of poor catches, but the grain ships from Kaffa have made excellent time." You decode. Cold north winds mean faster travel south for the grain ships from the Crimean port of Kaffa. That means a glut of grain might be arriving in Constantinople soon, potentially dropping the price. But poor fisheries could mean protein is getting scarce, which might drive up the price of other foods, affecting the spending power of the common people, which could, in turn, impact the market for your next shipment of medium quality cloth. Your single brain is performing a multivariable economic analysis based on the complaints of disgruntled fishermen. You lean back, the code swimming in your mind. This is your world. A world where a chat about the weather is never just small talk. It is a stock ticker, a risk assessment, a futures forecast. Every raindrop reported is a variable in the grand, terrifying, and exhilarating equation of your survival. The pen in your hand is your seismograph, recording the tremors of a world in constant, unpredictable motion. And you are learning, word by painstaking word, to predict the earthquake. A new kind of letter arrives. The parchment is finer, the seal more elaborate, not the personal mark of a merchant, but the imposing symbol of the Venetian state, the Lion of St. Mark. It is a directive, but also a request. It comes from an official connected to the Signoria, the ruling council. They are, in their own elegant bureaucratic language, taking a census of the winds. They wish to know, from your agents and correspondents in Alexandria, about the prevailing conditions in the eastern Mediterranean. They ask for details on the timing of the Meltemi, the fierce summer north winds of the Aegean, and the state of the passages around Cyprus. This is not a lone merchant's anxiety. This is the state tapping into your nervous system. You are witnessing, firsthand, the Venetian Doge's secret advantage. The transformation of 1,000 private weather worries into a centralized strategic asset. Venice didn't have a merchant navy. Venice was a merchant navy, and the state was its cunning captain. The mainstream historical fact here is the existence of the Venetian Muda system. The Muda were state-organized, compulsory convoys. The Senate would decree the departure dates for galley fleets to specific destinations: the Flanders Muda, the Beirut Muda, the Black Sea Muda. This wasn't just about safety in numbers. It was about controlling the flow of high-value trade and maximizing the Republic's tax revenue. But to schedule these convoys effectively, to ensure the galleys, heavy or on-sail hybrids, caught the most favorable winds and avoided the worst storms, the Senate needed data. And their most abundant source of data was you, and merchants like you. Your private letters, collected by spies, shared by patriotic traders, or formally solicited as this one has been, became the raw feed for the Republic's early warning system. You realize your network is now a covert extension of the Venetian intelligence apparatus. When your man in Crete writes to you about a sudden, vicious sirocco blowing sand from Africa that delayed his ship for a week, that information, if passed to the right official, might adjust the departure window for the next state galley convoy to Alexandria. By pooling the scattered, intimate weather reports of hundreds of merchants, the Venetian state was building a crude but powerful meteorological model of the Mediterranean. They were seeing patterns no individual could see. They knew, for instance, that a hard winter in the Alps often meant a late, wet spring in the Po Valley, which could delay the shipment of timber for ship repairs from the mainland. This wasn't just business, it was geopolitics. Knowledge of the winds was knowledge of power. The Venetians, and later other maritime powers, even monitored biological intelligence. They kept records not just of winds, but of migration patterns of tuna and other fish schools, as these were often tied to specific water temperatures and currents, which in turn affected both food supply for their crews and the movements of rival fishing fleets whose movements could be a cover for espionage. A report of the tuna running early off Sicily was a piece of the grand puzzle. Your humble letter about becalmed seas near Rhodes might be cross-referenced with a Genoese spy's report on Ottoman shipbuilding in Anatolia and a fisherman's tale of strange currents. The Doge's advisors were the original data scientists, working with a messy, human-fed database. Historians still argue whether this systematic state use of mercantile intelligence was a defining, conscious strategy that gave Venice its edge, or merely an ad hoc, opportunistic harvesting of information that was already flowing. Was the Venetian Senate a proto-Pentagon with a dedicated weather analysis desk, or were they just very good listeners who knew how to connect the dots their citizens were already drawing? The truth likely lies in a characteristically Venetian blend of ruthless pragmatism and clever improvisation. They didn't invent the merchant's weather letter. They simply recognized its power and found a way to nationalize it. You prepare your response to the official request. You sift through your recent letters from the East, collating the relevant snippets. You write carefully, knowing this is for a different audience. The familiar, personal anxiety is tempered with a more formal, observational tone. Regarding the winds of the Aegean, our correspondents in Chios report the Maltemi began fiercely in early July and showed no sign of abating through August, making westbound travel arduous but eastbound passage swift. As you write, you feel a strange duality. You are still a private individual protecting your own interests. But in this moment, you are also a sensor in a vast, distributed machine, a machine designed to keep the most serene Republic of Venice serene, and more importantly, rich. Your ink, once just a shield against personal ruin, is now helping to chart the course of an empire. The weather is no longer just your business, it's state business. And you have just filed your report. The letter from Siena is written in a hand that shakes, the ink blotted in places as if by a trembling quill or perhaps even a drop of sweat. It is from your primary banker, a partner in the great house of Bardi. The language is circumspect, veiled in the formal courtesy of high finance, but the panic hums beneath the words like a taut wire. The anticipated remittances from our associates in the Champagne fairs have been delayed. The disruptions to the overland routes, compounded by local difficulties with the harvest, have caused a regrettable constriction of liquidity. We must, with profound regret, inquire if the schedule for your next interest payment might be adjusted. You don't need a codebook for this. This is the sound of a financial domino beginning to teeter. And it started, like so much else, with the weather. Let's trace the domino fall. The local difficulties with the harvest in Champagne. Champagne, in northeastern France, wasn't just wine country yet. It was the site of the cycle of great international fairs, the pulsating heart of European finance and trade. Merchants from Italy, Flanders, Germany, and France would meet there to settle accounts, using letters of credit and bills of exchange. The fairs operated on a precise, rhythmic schedule, and their success depended on everything arriving on time: goods, merchants, and most importantly, money. Now, picture a cold, wet spring in Champagne. The mainstream historical fact is that these conditions could be catastrophic. A poor local harvest meant less surplus grain to feed the sudden influx of thousands of fairgoers: merchants, teamsters, servants, bankers. Food prices would skyrocket. More critically, those disruptions to the overland routes meant the merchants carrying the physical goods and the promissory notes couldn't get there. Or they arrived late, missing their assigned settlement days. The entire fair was a delicately timed dance of debt and credit. If the Flemish wool merchant couldn't get to the fair to collect what the Italian cloth buyer owed him, he couldn't, in turn, pay back the Sienese banker who had financed his wool purchase in England. The chain of credit, stretching from an English sheepfold to a Sienese counting house, snapped in a muddy field in France. Your banker in Siena isn't just being difficult. He is literally out of cash because a rain cloud decided to park itself over Reims for 3 extra weeks. Your personal crisis, a potential default on your loan, is a microsymptom of a macroclimate event. Some of the most sensitive weather reports in bankers' archives concern the health of mules. The overland cart trade, especially through the Alpine passes, relied on trains of mules. A report of mortality among the mule trains on the Morne-Cenis Pass due to an early blizzard was financial news of the highest order. It meant silk from Lucca, spices from Venice, and silver from Germany weren't coming. Bankers were, in effect, betting on animal husbandry and mountain meteorology. Your fortune could hinge on the lung capacity of a pack animal facing a snowdrift. So when your banker writes of disruptions to the overland routes, he might be euphemistically describing a scene of frozen mule carcasses half buried in a high pass, their valuable cargo slowly being claimed by the ice. Historians still argue whether the repeated climate-driven shocks to this system, like the one threatening you now, were the primary cause of the famous bankruptcies of the great Italian banking houses like the Bardi and Peruzzi in the 1340s. Was it simply a run of bad weather and poor harvests that collapsed their web of credit? Or were deeper structural flaws, overextension, political loans to default-prone kings like Edward III of England, the real cause, with the weather merely providing the final, fatal nudge? It's the eternal debate. Was it the system, or the storm? As you stare at the banker's letter, it's a distinction without a difference. The effect is the same. Your liquidity is evaporating. You feel the chill of systemic risk. This isn't just your galley in a storm anymore. This is the entire edifice of medieval finance groaning under a climatic strain. The fear is different now, less immediate, more insidious. It's the fear of a silent, invisible crash, where your assets might still exist on paper. Your wool is fine, your glassware is beautiful. But they are suddenly worthless because no one has the ready money to buy them. The market has frozen, not from ice, but from a paralysis of trust triggered by muddy roads and a failed harvest. You put the Sienese letter down next to the others. The cheerful note about the Thames not freezing, the worried lines about Bruges mud, the official Venetian inquiry about the Meltemi, they are all connected. They are all fragments of a single, unstable climate that governs not just the waves, but the very flow of gold. And right now, that flow is threatening to stop. You must write back to Siena, not with a promise of payment, but with a plea for time, a plea that is really a prayer for the sun to come out, for the roads to harden, for the chain of credit to thaw. You are negotiating with your banker, but your real adversary is the spring of 1316. You attend Mass on Sunday, the incense thick in the air, the Latin chant a familiar comfort. The priest speaks of God's will, of his mysterious and sometimes harsh providence. You bow your head, you make the sign of the cross, you truly believe. And then, walking home through the narrow streets, your mind immediately returns to the ledger. You calculate the loss from the delayed wool shipment in terms of potential interest earned, and the lost opportunity cost of not having that capital free to invest in the next venture. There is no contradiction in your mind. None at all. For you, and for every successful merchant of your age, the spiritual and the material are not separate realms. They are a single, complicated tapestry. A storm is both a sign of divine displeasure and a very specific number in the debit column. When God's will has a price tag, you are the bookkeeper. This is the peculiar duality of the medieval merchant's soul. The mainstream historical reality is that the Church's doctrine on usury, charging interest on loans, loomed over every financial transaction. It created a profound moral anxiety. Making money from money, without labor or risk, was considered sinful. But the entire commercial revolution was built on credit, on the productive use of capital. So, merchants and bankers developed elaborate theological and practical workarounds. They might call interest a gift or a penalty for late payment. They invested in risky ventures where profit was a reward for shared danger, not guaranteed interest. Every transaction was a tightrope walk between heaven and the marketplace. So when a storm sank a ship, it wasn't just bad luck. It was a potential sign of God's judgment on a possibly sinful contract, or a test of faith, and it was an absolute financial disaster that required a cold, clear-headed response. You had to pray for the souls of the drowned sailors and immediately file a claim with the insurer, or curse the lack of one. The practice of dry exchange. This was a financial fiction designed to evade the usury laws. A merchant in Genoa would sell a sum of money to a banker in Bruges at the local exchange rate, with a contract to buy it back at a future date at the Bruges rate. But the future rate was pre-agreed to be worse for the Genoese merchant, effectively baking in a hidden interest charge. The paperwork made it look like a currency exchange that lost money, not a loan that earned it. The loophole was an open secret, a wink between God and Mammon. The weather entered this, too. A contract for dry exchange might be pegged to the arrival of a specific ship, its schedule at the mercy of the winds. So you'd find yourself praying both for fair winds to make your shipment arrive on time to cover your fictional exchange, and for divine forgiveness for engaging in the fictional exchange in the first place. Your spiritual and logistical anxieties were two threads of the same knot. Historians still argue whether this constant negotiation between faith and finance fostered a uniquely medieval form of capitalism, one riddled with guilt and creative loopholes, or if it was merely a superficial religious veneer slapped onto the same ruthless profit motive that has always existed. Did the merchant who endowed a chapel after a successful voyage do so out of genuine piety and thanksgiving, or was it a transactional bargain with God, a tithe to secure future good weather? The letters often don't help us decide. A man might write to his partner, "God willing, the winds will favor the roccaforte," and in the next sentence, "If it arrives after the calends of March, the price for pepper will have fallen by 15%, so we must factor that loss." The divine will and the market forecast are given equal billing. You sit at your desk after Mass, the smell of incense still clinging to your clothes. You draft a letter to a monastic house in the hills with which you do business. They sell the wool from their vast flocks. Your tone is deeply respectful, laden with religious formulae. You inquire about the health of the abbot, you promise prayers for their community. Then you get to the point. You have heard of a blight affecting sheep in the neighboring valley. Has it reached their pastures? What is the quality and quantity of the upcoming shearing? You are, with the same pen, expressing Christian charity and conducting ruthless market reconnaissance on a holy institution. You see no conflict. The blight is both a trial sent by God to test the monk's faith and a market-moving event that will dictate the price you pay. Your final line captures it perfectly. We place this matter, as all things, in the hands of our Lord, and await your prudent assessment of the fleece. Providence and prudence. You are a man of your time, standing squarely at the intersection of the cathedral and the counting house, trying to read the weather vane on the spire while calculating the cost of the storm it's predicting. A new chill enters the correspondence, one that has nothing to do with the damp spring of Flanders or the mistral of the Mediterranean. It is the deep, marrow-freezing cold of the north. The letters from the Baltic arrive less frequently, carried on ships that only dare the passage in the narrow window between the retreating pack ice and the onset of the autumn gales. The parchment itself feels different, thicker, greasier sometimes, as if resistant to the damp. The handwriting is often more angular, the Latin peppered with strange, harsh-sounding place names: Revel, Danzig, Visby. These are dispatches from the edge of your world, from the domain of the Hanseatic League, and they speak a language of frost. Your agent in Lübeck, a city of red brick warehouses that smell of salt and pine tar, writes not of pepper or silk, but of herring, timber, and amber. And his most critical reports are about ice. The Sound froze solid in early December, he reports. The Øresund is passable only by ice sled from Helsinge to Helsingborg. No ship has moved for 60 days. The stock of salted herring in Bergen is high, but the price of Baltic grain in Bruges will be catastrophic by spring if the thaw is late. You are learning the rhythm of a different kind of weather, not the sudden, violent storm, but the slow, inexorable grip of winter. A frozen sea wasn't just an obstruction, it was a complete reset of geography and economics. Land routes became vital, controlled by the Teutonic Knights or local princes who charged exorbitant tolls for sleigh passage. The price of a basket of rye in Ghent next April was being determined right now by the thickness of the ice in the Danish Straits. The mainstream historical fact is the Hanseatic League's mastery of this brutal environment. This was a mercantile federation, not a state, bound by mutual interest and ruthless pragmatism. Their network of contour, trading posts, from London to Novgorod was a nervous system exquisitely tuned to the cold. Their communications were legendary for their speed and reliability, using relays of couriers on horseback and swift cogs that could ride the North Sea swells. But the true infrastructure was information about the freeze and thaw. The League's power derived from knowing, before anyone else, when the Baltic would open for business. Their letters were the telegrams of the frozen world. The ice calendar. In the archives of Hanseatic towns, you find not just mentions of freezing, but specific, repetitive observations. They noted the first frost, the first day the harbor was fast, completely frozen over, the first day the ice could bear the weight of a cart, and the dramatic day of the ice break, when the great floes cracked and began to move out to sea. This was data collection with a life-or-death urgency. A merchant who misjudged the strength of young ice and sent his sledge out too early could lose men, horses, and cargo to the black, hypothermic water below. The letters contain grim, matter-of-fact reports of such losses, a cost of doing business at the world's icy rim. Your Lübeck agent isn't just telling you about the weather, he's giving you a risk assessment for winter logistics. Historians still argue whether the Hanseatic League's cohesion and success were primarily a product of this shared environmental struggle, a collective fight against the cold and the dark, or if it was always fundamentally about monopolizing trade routes and suppressing competition, using the climate as a convenient barrier to entry for outsiders. Was it a brotherhood of the frozen sea, or a cartel that used winter as its enforcer? The letters show both. There are warm expressions of trust and shared identity between Hanseatic merchants, born of facing the same dangers. And there are also cold instructions to undercut Scottish merchants in Norway or to embargo a town that defied League rules, actions as ruthless as any ice storm. You file the Lübeck letter with the others, but it feels different. It speaks of a scale of cold you can barely imagine in your Mediterranean port. Your worries about rain muddying a road seem almost quaint next to the report of a sea turning to stone for months on end. Yet the principle is the same. The information is vital. That note about the high herring stock in Bergen? If the spring thaw is early and the Hanseatic cogs come flooding into the North Sea ports with holds full of cheap, salted fish, it could depress the price of the cod your own vessels are bringing from Iceland. A freeze in the Baltic could ripple all the way to your dinner table and your profit margins. The Hanseatic courier, his face scarred by frostbite, riding through a silent, white forest, is as much a part of your supply chain as the carters in Bruges. His message about the ice is a global commodity price alert, written in the language of cold. The letters from the east are different. They arrive less as single sheets and more as bundles, carried over immense distances by caravan and dhow, smelling of sandalwood and strange spices. The script is often not Latin at all, but Arabic, or the elegant curls of Persian, with a translation hastily scrawled in the margin by a multilingual Jewish or Armenian intermediary in some Levantine port. These dispatches don't just report the weather, they speak of it with a tone of reverent, fearful mastery. They speak of the monsoon. Your contact in Aden, at the mouth of the Red Sea, writes on papyrus, not parchment. His message is brief, for the window to catch the departing ship is narrow. The Kharif winds from the southwest have begun with great force. No ship will dare the crossing to India for 3 months. The pepper from Malabar already in our warehouses has tripled in value. The myrrh harvest in the Hadramaut was poor due to drought. Await the northeast winds in October. This is not gossip. This is holy writ. In the Indian Ocean, the weather didn't just affect trade, it was the trade schedule. The monsoon winds were the engine of the global spice trade, a predictable, terrifying, and absolute force. To misread them was to die. To know them was to hold the keys to the wealth of continents. The mainstream historical fact here is the seasonal rhythm of the monsoon trade. From April to September, the southwest monsoon, the Kharif, blows from Africa toward India, making the westward journey from the Malabar coast to Arabia fast and direct. But it blows fiercely, with torrential rains, making the eastbound return journey impossible. Then, from October to March, the winds reverse. The northeast monsoon, the northeast, allows ships to sail from Arabia back to India. The entire economy of the Indian Ocean basin was built around this 6-month pendulum swing. Your agent in Aden isn't giving you a tip, he's stating a fundamental, unchangeable fact of physics and economics. The tripling price of pepper isn't just due to scarcity, it's the cost of time, the premium paid for defying the wind's schedule. The monsoon charts, or Ramoni, used by Arab and Indian navigators. These were not maps of land, but maps of wind and time. They detailed the precise dates for the changing of the monsoons in different latitudes, the signs to watch for, the behavior of seabirds, the quality of the swell, the appearance of certain clouds, and the star courses to follow. This knowledge was a trade secret more valuable than any single cargo. A ship's nakoda, captain, would guard his Ramoni with his life. The information in your Aden letter, the declaration that no ship will dare the crossing, is a surface-level reflection of this deep, proprietary science of wind. You are receiving the conclusion, not the data set. The real power, the silent, whispered knowledge that moves the world's most valuable goods, is held in the memory and on the closely guarded wax tablets of the men who ride the monsoon. Historians still argue whether the European merchants, like you in Genoa or Venice, ever truly understood the monsoon system, or if they remained perpetual outsiders, dependent on local middlemen for this most critical piece of intelligence. Did the Venetians stationed in Alexandria ever learn to read the Indian Ocean winds as they learned to read the Mediterranean Meltemi? Or were they always at the mercy of their Arab and Indian counterparts, who controlled the spigot of information along with the spigot of spice? The letters suggest a frustrating dependency. Your agent's report is second-hand, bought from a Yemeni trader. You have no sensor network in the Indian Ocean. Your world of detailed, peer-to-peer weather reporting ends at the shores of the Levant. Beyond that, you are in the realm of rumor, hearsay, and precious, purchased whispers. This changes the texture of your anxiety. In the Mediterranean, you feel you can, to some degree, manage the risk. You can choose a different route, delay a sailing, consult multiple sources. But with the monsoon, there is no management. There is only obedience. The monsoon is the ultimate monopoly. It dictates not just the how but the if and when of the most profitable trade on earth. Your letter from Aden is a humbling document. It reminds you that for all your intricate networks, your coded letters, and your financial ingenuity, the true masters of the global weather report are the men who watch the sea not for storms, but for the ancient, predictable turning of the world's breath. Your wealth depends on a wind that blows according to a timetable you did not write and cannot change. All you can do is listen for the whisper of its arrival in a scrap of papyrus from a faraway port, and adjust your ledger accordingly. The letters from your family's estate in the Tuscan hills have taken on a new, persistent tone over the last few years, a note of confusion shading into desperation. Your uncle, who manages the vineyards and olive groves, is a practical man, not given to alarm. But his last 3 messages have been variations on a theme of wrongness. The spring rains did not come. The vines flowered too early, then a frost in April burned the shoots. The yield will be a third of last year's, and the must is thin. The next year, the summer has been endless, a dry heat that cracks the earth. The olives are small, the oil will be bitter and scarce. And now, the latest, the winter was without snow. The ground is hard, but not frozen deep. We fear for the wells in the summer. I do not remember a string of seasons like this. You've been too busy with the grand sweep of pepper and wool to pay full attention, dismissing it as local misfortune. But now, as you lay his letters next to one from your factor in England complaining of incessant cold rains that rot the grain in the field, and another from a Norse contact in Greenland describing pack ice persisting far into the fishing grounds, and the hay failing, a cold suspicion slithers down your spine. These aren't isolated incidents. They are notes in a discordant, global symphony. You are, without knowing the term, witnessing the opening movements of the Little Ice Age. The mainstream historical concept you're stumbling into is that of a climatic anomaly. Starting roughly in the early 14th century, the North Atlantic region and much of Europe began to experience a pronounced cooling and increased volatility in weather patterns. Winters grew longer and harsher, summers shorter and wetter. Growing seasons contracted. Glacier advanced. This wasn't a single event, but a grinding, century-long shift. And the first people to notice it, to record its symptoms in agonizing detail, weren't scientists. They were farmers, vintners, shepherds, and the merchants like you who depended on them. Your uncle's letters are core samples of a changing climate, written in the language of failed crops and anxious prophecy. The tax records and tithe receipts. As harvests failed with increasing frequency, peasants and landowners couldn't pay their dues. Lords and churches would sometimes note the reason for default. Owing to the frost, because of the great rains, the hail destroyed the barley. These dry administrative documents become screams of climatic stress. A merchant's letter complaining about the poor quality of Spanish wool might be linked, a few steps down the chain, to a starving flock on a rain-sodden mesa in Castile. You are starting to connect dots on a map you cannot see, drawing lines between your uncle's thin wine, the English rot, and the Norse ice. The supply chain is being stressed not by a local storm, but by a planetary sigh. Historians and climatologists still argue fiercely about the causes and onset of the Little Ice Age. Was it triggered by a slight wobble in the Earth's orbit? A period of low solar activity, later called the Maunder Minimum? A cascade of massive volcanic eruptions that filled the atmosphere with sun-blocking aerosols? Or some hellish combination of all three? The debate is alive precisely because the instrumental data doesn't exist. The proof is in the proxy data, tree rings, ice cores, and mercantile letters. Your uncle's observation about the April frost is a data point. The Norse report on persistent pack ice is another. You are an unwilling participant in a planet-wide data collection project, and the findings are terrifying. This changes the nature of the game entirely. You could plan around a storm. You could hedge against a bad harvest in one region. But how do you hedge against a world that is becoming, season by season, less generous, less predictable? The old rules, the saints' days that once roughly predicted planting times, the known sailing seasons, the expected yields from familiar lands, are all starting to fray. Your anxiety graduates from the tactical to the existential. This isn't about a single shipment anymore. It's about the fundamental stability of the system that allows shipments to exist at all. When you write back to your uncle, you can no longer just offer financial consolation or suggest a different grafting technique for the vines. You find yourself asking larger, more helpless questions, echoing his own, "What is happening to the seasons?" The question hangs in the air, unanswered, a silent scream in the margins of a business letter. The paper trail you've been following for profit has become the chronicle of a slow-motion disaster. Faced with this creeping wrongness in the world, a new kind of merchant begins to emerge from the ranks, not just a risk-taker, but a pattern seeker. You've met them, the old men in the loggia, their eyes milky but their minds sharp, who can tell you not just the price of alum in 1310, but what the winds were like that spring. They don't just react to the last letter, they compile. And you, in your growing desperation, are becoming one of them. You pull out chests of old correspondence, not for sentimental reasons, but for forensic analysis. You are trying to move from quill to quantification, to build the first crude predictive models. You start a new book. Not a ledger of debits and credits, but a climate commonplace book. On one page, you copy out all the references to weather from your English letters over the past decade. 1310, hard frost in London in May ruined the cherry crop. 1312, a dry summer, Thames so low the watermills stopped. 1315, the great rain, continuous from March to October, famine in the north. On the opposite page, you note the corresponding prices for English wool and grain in your home port for those years. You're looking for a correlation, a hidden rule. If a cold spring in England means a smaller wool clip, can you buy early from Spain the next time you hear of a late frost in Yorkshire? You are attempting to beat the system, to turn the chaos of climate into an algorithm for profit. The mainstream historical fact here is the birth of empirical observation as a business tool. These merchants were practicing a form of early data science without the theory. They were creating time series data, centuries before the term was invented. The famous Venetian merchant and diarist, Girolamo Priuli, would later write detailed accounts of weather and its economic impacts, but he was part of a tradition. You, in your dim study, are part of that tradition's raw, uncelebrated beginning. You're not trying to understand why the weather changed. You're trying to discern what it did next, and more importantly, what it would do to prices. Your goal isn't knowledge for its own sake, it's a predictive edge. Some merchants began to blend this empirical data with astrological almanacs. It was the ultimate hedge. If the data from your letters suggested a wet autumn based on the past 5 years' patterns, but the almanac, based on the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, predicted a dry one, what did you do? The most pragmatic minds of the age saw no contradiction. They would weight both inputs. You might find a merchant's notebook that contained, on one page, careful tallies of ship arrivals delayed by westerly winds, and on the next, a copied chart of the moon's phases for the coming year. It was a two-track system: track the tangible past, and consult the celestial future. You were covering all bases, rational and superstitious, in your war against uncertainty. Historians still argue whether this merchant-led data collection ever amounted to a true predictive science, or if it was merely a more organized form of superstition, seeing patterns in noise. Could they actually forecast? There's evidence that some did get better at anticipating regional shortages. A merchant with good Italian networks might hear of a poor wheat harvest in Sicily and correctly speculate that Egyptian wheat prices would rise as buyers shifted their demand, allowing him to buy futures in Alexandria early. But was this weather prediction, or just clever market arbitrage? The line is blurred. Your commonplace book is an attempt to find a signal in the storm of information, to hear a rhythm in the chaotic drumbeat of frost, rain, and drought reported in 1,000 different hands. You close the heavy book, your fingers stained with ink and dust. The model is imperfect, frustrating. For every seeming pattern, 3 dry summers in a row in Valencia meant high almond prices. There is an exception that ruins the rule. The world is too complex, the data too sparse and anecdotal. Yet, the very act of compiling it changes you. You no longer see each weather report as an isolated crisis, but as a point on a graph only you can see. The anxiety doesn't vanish, but it morphs. It becomes the frustration of the researcher, the gambler who thinks he's almost cracked the code. You are no longer just a victim of the weather, you are its student, however struggling. And in that struggle, in those ink-smudged pages, lies the ghost of a future where humans wouldn't just read the weather, but would one day try to forecast it scientifically. You are building a castle of deduction on foundations of parchment and rumor. The most terrifying letters are not the long, detailed ones full of bad news. They are the short ones where something critical is missing. You hold a letter from your Genos colleague, Francesco, who is financing a fleet bound for Cyprus, a crucial node in the Eastern grain trade. The parchment is covered with his tight, efficient script, lists of ships, cargo manifests, loan agreements with the Bardi branch in Nicosia, the expected price of Cypriot salt. You scan it twice, a third time, your heart beginning to hammer a dull rhythm against your ribs. It's not there. He didn't mention it. In his previous letter, 6 weeks ago, he had written, almost casually, "The sailors here speak of a strange stillness in the air off the Anatolian coast, and the water has an unwholesome warmth for the season. We watch the sky." It was a classic merchant's weather note, a flag of caution. In this new letter, bursting with financial details and bold plans for the fleet's departure, that flag is gone. Silently lowered. You are left with a chilling postscript that never was. You are now living the nightmare of information lapse. In a system built on the flow of data, a missing piece is as loud as an alarm bell. Did the strange conditions pass without incident, making them not worth mentioning? Or did Francesco, in his focus on numbers and schedules, dismiss the sailor's gossip as superstition? Or worse, did he include it in a separate, now lost missive, carried by a courier who lies at the bottom of a ravine, the warning dissolving in the rain? You are paralyzed. The mainstream historical reality is that medieval communications were a chain of single points of failure. A sunken message boat, a bandit ambushed courier, a letter lost in the chaotic baggage of a moving court, any of these could sever a vital link. The weather report that never arrived could be the one that mattered most. Let's follow the phantom postscript to its potential, grim conclusion. The unwholesome warmth of the water off Anatolia could be a sign of a brewing late-season Mediterranean hurricane, a phenomenon rare but not unknown, called by some a Medican. A fleet of heavy-laden grain cogs, caught in such a storm off the rocky coast of Cyprus, would be in mortal peril. Francesco's unmade note, his unreported decision to delay sailing for a few days based on that sailor's gossip, could have been the difference between profit and total loss. You are left holding the financial agreements, but not the atmospheric context that should govern them. The contract is here. The clause written by God is missing. The letter of marque problem. Sometimes, critical news did arrive, but too late to be acted upon because it was captured. If a ship carrying letters was taken by pirates or a rival city's navy, the correspondence became prize goods. The information inside, about market conditions, ship movements, weather patterns, could be sold or used by the captors. There are cases where a merchant learned of a storm that destroyed his own fleet from a letter that had been captured, read by his enemies, and then somehow made its way back to him months later as a cruel trophy. The news traveled, but it traveled as a ghost, haunting him with knowledge that was useless because it was past. Your missing postscript might be sitting in a Catalan pirate's stronghold, utterly meaningless to him, while you agonize over its absence. Historians still argue whether specific historical disasters, like the loss of a particular fleet or the failure of a major banking house, can be directly traced to a single piece of missed meteorological intelligence. Can we blame the collapse of the Venetian salt monopoly in the 1370s on a series of letters about Adriatic storms that went down with a message galley? Or were the causes always more complex, with the missing weather report merely the poetic final straw? It's the for want of a nail debate on a continental scale. As you stare at Francesco's impeccably detailed yet contextually hollow letter, you feel the truth might be both. The systemic causes were there, overextension, political risk. But the trigger, the spark that lit the tinder, could very well have been a gust of wind that was noted by a sailor, half heard by a merchant, and then never inscribed on a page now lost to time. You cannot write to Francesco for clarification. By the time your letter reached him, the fleet would have sailed or foundered. All you can do is act on the information you have, the bold, sunny, weatherless financial plan, while a cold dread pools in your stomach. You must decide. Do you invest further in this venture, trusting Francesco's silent confidence? Or do you pull your capital, trusting the ghost of the postscript he didn't write? Your decision is a gamble not on markets, but on the reliability of a friend's observational skills and his judgment of what was worth telling you. The weather isn't just in the letters. Its terrifying absence is also there, in the blank spaces between the lines, in the conversations that never made it to parchment. You are learning that in this world, silence could be the most expensive climate of all. You break the seal on a different kind of letter. The handwriting is younger, less assured than the commercial scripts you're used to. It's from your son, Giovanni, sent from his apprenticeship with your brother in Barcelona. The first half is exactly what you'd expect, a dutiful report on his studies of Catalan mercantile law, the price of Valencian saffron, his improving grasp of the lingua franca of the ports. Then, the tone shifts. The letters become less formal, the lines crowding the margin. Father, the summer here is oppressive, not with heat, but with a damp that clings to the stones and the soul. There is a sickness in the lower quarters. They call it the miasma from the stagnant waters after the spring floods. Uncle as well, but he coughs at night, a dry sound that worries me. I ensure he drinks the tonic the apothecary recommends. The shipment of Tunisian leather is delayed. The trader says the roads from Granada are unsafe due to bandits, but I think he fears the sickness in the ports more. I am careful. I pray for your health, and for mother's. Do not let the sisters go to the market if the rumors of fever reach you. Here, laid bare, is the truth you've been circling. The personal and the professional are not just intertwined, they are the same substance. Giovanni's letter is a mercantile dispatch. It contains data on saffron prices and shipping delays. It is a weather report. It describes the damp, the floods, the unhealthy air. And it is a raw, human cry of fear and love. The miasma he mentions is the climate made personal, a weather condition that threatens not ledger entries, but his uncle's lungs. The bandits on the Granadon roads are a political weather system, shifting with the winds of conflict and disorder. You aren't just reading a business update, you are reading your child's heart, beating with the same anxieties that govern the price of leather. The mainstream historical fact embodied here is the complete lack of separation between the household and the firm. The family was the business. Your son is both your heir and your junior partner. His health is an asset. Your brother's cough is a liability. Your wife's management of the household during your absence is a crucial operational duty. A fever in your home city is a supply chain disruption for your emotional and financial stability. Giovanni's plea to keep his sisters from the market is a risk management strategy for your most precious, irreplaceable commodities, your family. The letter's power comes from its helpless honesty. He is applying the analytical skills you've taught him, assessing risk, reporting conditions, to the terrifying, unquantifiable reality of love and mortality. The embedded home remedies. Alongside instructions to buy 200 barrels of Icelandic stockfish, a merchant might include, from his wife, a recipe for a poultice against chest fever using rosemary and honey, begged from a wise woman in Crete. Or a father might write to his son abroad, I am sending a bolt of Flemish wool, and also a jar of the ointment the Jewish physician prepared for your mother's joint pain, which she swears is better in damp weather. Weather, health, and commerce travel in the same diplomatic pouch. The climate that swells the grain in the hold also swells his mother's arthritic knees, and both are matters of urgent, pragmatic concern. Giovanni's mention of the apothecary's tonic is part of this tradition. He is managing his uncle's health as he would manage a delicate cargo, with care and reported vigilance. Historians still argue whether this fusion of the emotional and the commercial created a unique strain of pre-modern stress, a kind of relentless, holistic anxiety, or if it provided a stronger psychological buffer. Was the merchant who wept over a letter about his son's fever and then immediately calculated the cost of delayed leather more burdened, or was his grief given a channel, action, a problem to solve, that made it more bearable? Did the fact that love and money were defended with the same pen provide a grim comfort, or did it poison both? Giovanni's letter offers no answer. It simply is. It is the human sound beneath the numerical hum of history. The weather he reports isn't an abstract force, it's the air his beloved uncle struggles to breathe. You put the letter down, your throat tight. The other correspondence, the Venetian Senate's inquiries, the Hanseatic ice reports, the banker's pleas, suddenly seems like distant thunder. This is the lightning strike, close to home. You will write back, of course. You will advise on the leather shipment, suggesting an alternate route via Mallorca. You will authorize extra funds for a better physician. You will reassure him about his sisters. Your response will be a perfect amalgam, a business letter, a medical consultation, and a father's hug, all condensed into ink. The quill in your hand feels heavier than ever. It is no longer just a tool for commerce or climate tracking. It is the only thread you have to stitch close the terrifying distance between you and your boy, across a landscape where the weather is not just a matter of wind, but of fever, and where the most valuable thing you trade in is the safety of those you love. Decades pass. The candle on your desk is now lit by your grandson, who has your same frown of concentration. The world has changed, and yet it hasn't. The great cooling persists. Famines and pestilence have scarred the century. New trade routes have opened, others have faded. And in quiet, dust-filled rooms across Europe, in the Archivio di Stato in Venice, in the Hanseatic archives of Lubeck, in the vaults of Florentine banking houses, the mountains of paper you and your kind produced are sleeping. They are not yet history, they are just old paperwork, the forgotten invoices and ledgers of a bygone age. But a new kind of seeker is beginning to arrive, with a different hunger. They are the historians, the climatologists, the scholars. And they are about to perform an archaeology of the inbox. Picture one such scholar, 3 centuries after your death. He wears simpler clothes, his light provided not by a tallow candle but by a high window. He sneezes as he opens a chest, the smell of centuries-old dust and mildew filling his nostrils. He isn't looking for treaties or chronicles of kings. He is looking for the boring stuff, the mercantile correspondence, the recordans, memory books, the ledgers. To him, your frantic letter about the muddy roads to Bruges is a treasure. Your son's worried note from Barcelona is a gold mine. He is not reading for the price of pepper. He is reading for the metadata, the dates, the locations, the offhand descriptions of the physical world. He is sifting your anxiety for data points to reconstruct a past you were simply trying to survive. The mainstream historical practice emerging from this is historical climatology. By aggregating thousands of these casual mentions, your uncle's report of an April frost, the Lubeck agent's note on the sound freezing, the Aden merchant's observation of a delayed monsoon, scientists can build a quantitative picture of past climate that instrumental records can't provide. They code your descriptions. Incessant rain becomes a precipitation index for Flanders in 1315. Winter was without snow becomes a temperature anomaly for Tuscany in 1322. Your mundane words, written to solve an immediate problem, are being translated into graphs and climate models. You are becoming a proxy witness. Your pen, wielded in fear, is now a scientific instrument. The weather word lexicons scholars have to create. Your language is not standardized. What you call a great storm, another merchant might call a typhoon, and another a whirlwind. Scholars have to build dictionaries to calibrate your hyperbole. Was a fearsome cold just a brisk winter day, or a lethal freeze that killed orchards? They cross-reference your accounts with other proxies, tree rings from that very region, ice core data from Greenland, to give your adjectives numerical value. That throwaway line about the unwholesome warmth of the Anatolian Sea? A modern climatologist might see it as a possible data point for a medieval marine heat wave, a piece of a larger puzzle about Mediterranean circulation patterns. You thought you were describing a hazard. You were also, unwittingly, taking the ocean's temperature. Historians and scientists still argue fiercely about the interpretive pitfalls of this archive. Can we trust the subjective, often self-interested observations of a medieval merchant? Was a report of a poor harvest due to climate, or to poor management, war, or a biased observer downplaying his own poor bargaining? The debate revolves around bias, representativeness, and the noise of human perception. One scholar's crucial climate signal is another's unreliable anecdote. Your letters are not clean data logs. They are human documents, stained with fear, greed, hope, and ignorance. The scholar in the archive must read through your mercantile motives to find the climatic facts, a task as delicate as separating strands of thread in a faded, tangled tapestry. As you sit in your own time, writing your letters, you are utterly unaware of this future resurrection. You are not writing for history, you are writing for next season's solvency, for your son's safety. Yet, in doing so, you are creating a resource of unimaginable value. Each sealed letter you send is a time capsule, not of grand events, but of the ordinary, daily pressure of the atmosphere on human affairs. The archive is the ultimate monument to your profession, not a statue of a bold adventurer, but endless shelves of filed anxiety. The scholar gently turns your brittle page, careful not to crumble its edge. He transcribes your words into a database, connecting your local observation to a global pattern. In that moment, across the gulf of centuries, your practical struggle to know the weather becomes the foundation for a science you could never have conceived. You wanted to predict the wind to protect your gold. He is using your words to understand the wind that shaped your world. The candle has burned down to a stub, its light now a faint, wavering halo in the dark room. The last letter you read tonight isn't on parchment. It's a glow from a screen, a modern echo. It's a real-time shipping dashboard, a Bloomberg terminal flickering with commodity futures, a satellite weather map updating itself silently, each pixel a calculation from a billion data points. You have, in a sense, traveled full circle. The desperate, ink-stained quest of the medieval merchant, to see the invisible patterns, to predict the unpredictable, to shrink the terrifying distance between event and knowledge, has culminated in this, a world awash in instant, quantified certainty. And yet, a strange, familiar ghost lingers in the machine. Think of your ancestor, the 14th century merchant, staring at a saint's calendar and a report of dolphin behavior. Now think of a modern algorithmic trader, their eyes glued to a screen that models hurricane paths, predicts drought impacts on soybean yields in Brazil, and calculates the insurance risk for a container ship passing through the South China Sea, all in microseconds. The goal is identical: to mitigate risk and seize advantage through superior environmental intelligence. The scale and speed are incomprehensible to your earlier self, but the impulse is a direct inheritance. Your anxiety about the Meltemi winds is now encoded in the subroutines of a logistics AI scheduling a mega-container ship through the Suez Canal. The medieval merchant's network of correspondence has been replaced by a digital nervous system of satellites, ocean buoys, and automated weather stations. The personal, handwritten warning about mud in Bruges is now a geolocated traffic alert on a trucker's GPS. We have not eliminated the weather's threat. We have built a vast, global scaffold of information to cling to as it rages around us. This is the mainstream historical through line, the evolution of environmental intelligence from anecdote to algorithm. The merchant's letters were the first distributed sensor network. The Hanseatic ice calendars were early climate datasets. Your attempts to find patterns in old correspondence were primitive machine learning. We stand on the shoulders of those anxious, scribbling giants. Every time you check a weather app on your phone, you are accessing the final, democratized product of a centuries-long mercantile project to know the sky. Some of the most cutting-edge climate science today still relies on the very archives you are creating. To refine their models of future climate change, scientists need to test them against the past. The historical climatology born from your letters provides the ground truth for these models. The weather patterns you painstakingly described in your struggle to sell wool are now used to calibrate supercomputers simulating the planet's atmosphere. Your ink helps train the AI. The very human, flawed observations you made are a crucial benchmark for our most advanced digital forecasts. The medieval and the hypermodern are in constant, silent dialogue. Historians and philosophers still argue whether this totalizing data saturation has truly conquered the ancient anxiety, or simply dressed it in new clothes. Have we traded the fear of the unknown for a deeper, more systemic dread, the fear of data breaches, of AI bias, of the single point of failure in a cloud server that could collapse a global just-in-time delivery system? Is the modern trader, paralyzed by a flash crash in the markets caused by an algorithmic feedback loop, any less helpless than you were when hearing of a storm 6 weeks after it sank your ship? The debate is about the illusion of control. We have more information than ever, but the fundamental fragility remains. A solar flare could knock out our satellites, returning us to an informational darkness your medieval mind would find intimately familiar. Our networks are more resilient, yet perhaps more brittle in their complexity. You close the laptop lid, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. The glow vanishes, leaving only the dying candle. The journey from the quill to the quantum chip is complete. The medieval merchant's world of tangible risk, of weather felt on the skin and reported in shaky script, has been translated into a universe of abstract data streams. But the core human experience, the need to foresee, to prepare, to connect across distance in the face of a capricious natural world, that has not changed. It has only been amplified, digitized, and accelerated. The letters have stopped. The data flows forever. And somewhere, in the silent heart of it all, the same question persists, asked first in ink, now in code. What is the wind doing? The tools have transformed, but the lookout, forever anxious, forever hopeful, remains. The wind outside has finally stilled, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. Think of all those voices now, the Genos merchant, the Hanseatic factor, the worried father in Barcelona, their urgent whispers trapped in ink and vellum, their individual tempests of fear long calmed. They sought certainty in a world that offered none, building castles of commerce on foundations of sand and season. And yet, in their very striving, in the countless mundane letters they left behind, they gave us something perhaps more valuable than certainty, a map of human resilience. We can almost see them, bent over their desks in 100 dim rooms, from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, their world lit by a single, guttering point of light against a vast and unknowable dark. They connected that world, stitch by precious stitch, with threads of gossip about the rain and lines of worry about the frost. They built the first web, not of silk, but of shared vulnerability. Their legacy isn't just in the prices they set or the fortunes they won and lost. It's in the quiet, persistent courage it took to send a message into the silence, hoping for a reply, hoping for a fair wind. So let the last image fade not of storms and ledgers, but of that simple, profound act. A hand setting down a quill, sprinkling sand over fresh ink, sealing a folded letter with a drop of wax. A message sent. A connection made. A stand taken against the chaos. Their anxieties are now our history, their paper trail our pathway to understanding a planet and a past. And as the final candle flickers out, leaving only the gentle dark, remember that their journey, our journey, to find our place in the weather of the world, continues. It is a story without an end, a letter forever in the mail, carried on a wind we are still learning to read. Now, rest. The watch is past. The night is calm.